with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later. And by that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, you remember that? He said, sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you.
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again?
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran. So when you look at Iran, you say, is it a replay? It's not exactly a replay, but here's the truth, that Iran from the beginning has seen that the presence of the United States in Iraq was a threat. A blessing, because we took out Saddam Hussein and the Baathists. They couldn't handle them. We took care of it for them. But also a threat, because they knew that they were next on the hit list. And so, of course, they got engaged. They lost 1 million people during the war with Iraq. And they've got a long and unprotectable, unsecurable border. So it was in their vital interest to be deeply involved inside Iraq. They tolerated our attacks on the Baathists. They were happy we captured Saddam Hussein, but they're building up their own network of influence, and to cement it, they occasionally give some military assistance and training and advice, either directly or indirectly, to both the insurgents and to the militias. And in that sense, it's not exactly parallel, because there has been, I believe, continuous Iranian engagement. Some of it legitimate, some of it illegitimate. I mean, you can hardly fault Iran because they're offering to do eye operations for Iraqis who need medical attention. That's not an offense that you can go to war over, perhaps, but it is an effort to gain influence. And the administration has stubbornly refused to talk with Iran about their perception, in part because they don't want to pay the price with their our U.S. domestic political base, the right-wing base, but also because they don't want to legitimate a government that they've been trying to overthrow. If you were Iran, you'd probably believe that you were mostly already at war with the United States anyway, since we've asserted that their government needs regime change.
Thanks for being with us. It isn't now the case that the American people need to prepare themselves for more deaths, for more wounded American service members at the hands of Iran and Iranian proxies?
Well, as we've said, and will continue to be the case, we will take necessary action to protect our U.S. forces, no matter where they're serving around the world. I'm not going to telegraph or forecast any potential response from the United States because of this attack, other than to say there will be a response.
It does not seek another war, but it will protect itself and respond appropriately following the drone attack that killed 3 American soldiers and wounded dozens near the Jordan-Syria border at a remote outpost called Tower 22. Since Israel's retaliation for the October the 7th attacks, US military bases in Syria and Iraq have been attacked more than 170 times. The group behind the deaths at the Tower 22 base, called Islamic Resistance in Iraq, are part of an Iranian-sponsored network across the Middle East.
We saw Hamas strike at Israel on October 7th, and this created a pretext for Israel to go into Gaza, and they went out of their way to do it in the most provocative manner imaginable. They were attempting to use that conflict to destabilize the entire region. They are succeeding. And in the wake of the Israeli invasion and ongoing conflict in Gaza, we saw Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis in Yemen, begin carrying out strikes on maritime shipping going to and from Israel. We saw the US and the British respond by carrying out missile and airstrikes across Yemen. We've watched the US carry out strikes in Iraq and Syria, and we've watched Israel attempt to provoke a conflict with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and Israel's also repeatedly attacked Syria in the meantime. So it is a general decline in regional security. There is a deliberate attempt to drag the entire region into a massive conflict. And I have explained why many times. Before this began, the Middle East was moving on without the United States. China brokered peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Syria was repairing its relationship with all of the Arab nations that participated in the US-led proxy war against Syria from 2011 onward. Even Turkey and Syria were beginning to repair their relationship. Everything was moving forward without the US, just like it was in Europe before the US managed to provoke a proxy war in Ukraine. And we saw in Europe, when the US triggered this war, it was able to get Europe back under control. They were able to cut Germany off from Russia. They literally blew up Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They were able to get all of Europe to completely cut ties with Russia, quit buying oil from Russia, and they even managed to throw in the cutting of ties with China as an additional benefit of those dynamics, those developing dynamics. And I feel like they're trying to create chaos in the Middle East to achieve the same sort of end. The article continues. While the Pentagon was quick to deny claims that U.S. forces might withdraw from Syria, CNN in a January 25th, 2024 article, this one here, U.S. and Iraqi governments expected to start talks on future of U.S. military presence in the country. It would note that discussions would focus on whether and when it will be feasible to end the U.S. military presence in Iraq. And the way that's worded is very open-ended to me. But at least they make it look like the process has begun. A similar process took place preceding the eventual withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan and Central Asia completed in August 2021. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was interpreted at the time as a symptom of waning U.S. power. And while that may have been a contributing factor, other analysts feared it was merely a means of freeing up U.S. resources to expand conflict elsewhere. This fear was confirmed by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken during a press conference in December 2022. The transcript is here. The link to this will be in the video description. He says, when it comes to Russia's war against Ukraine, if we were still in Afghanistan, it would have, I think, made much more complicated the support that we've been able to give and that others have been able to give Ukraine to resist and push back against the Russian aggression. It should be noted that the US had been deliberately drawing Russia into a wider conflict in Ukraine for years leading up to Russia's special military operation. It is thus troubling to consider similar policy papers to RAND Corporation's 2019 Extending Russia exist and lay out operations for likewise drawing Iran into a large-scale war with US-backed regime change as the ultimate objective. Such papers specifically lay out the necessary prerequisites for doing so and note the US occupation of Iraq as an obstruction for these planned provocations designed to draw Iran into wider war. Among the many provocations laid out in the 2009 Brookings Institution paper, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran, is the use of Israel as a proxy to attack and draw Iran into a war the US can then wade into after hostilities begin. And that paper is here. I have referenced it many times. If you have not read it, you need to read it. This is the playbook US foreign policy uses. This is specifically about Iran, but you can just switch Iran to any other targeted nation, and it is the exact same playbook. In chapter 5, titled Leave It to Bibi, Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike, the Brookings Institution's authors explain that in order for Israeli warplanes to strike Iran, they must overfly either US allies or nations occupied by US forces themselves, implicating the US in the strikes and negating the primary benefit of this option, distancing the United States from culpability. I've said this over and over again. The US is attempting to maintain plausible deniability ahead of deliberately provoking a war with Iran. This is what the Brookings Institution paper notes. As the occupying power in Iraq, the United States is responsible for defending Iraqi airspace. The alternative, and they're talking about the alternative for an Israeli airstrike on Iran via Turkish airspace or Saudi airspace, would also put the attack force into the skies of US allies equipped with American-supplied air defenses and fighter aircraft. In the case of Turkey, an Israeli overflight would be further complicated by the fact that Turkey is a NATO ally that the United States has a commitment to defend, and it hosts a large joint Turkish-American airbase along the most likely route of attack. The paper also notes, from the American perspective, this negates the whole point of the option, distancing the United States from culpability, and it could jeopardize American efforts in Iraq, thus making it a possible non-starter for Washington. An obvious solution exists to this problem. Not only have US troops leave Iraq, but appear to leave Iraq on bad terms with Baghdad. Even if withdrawal is still underway when Israeli warplanes cross Iraqi airspace, Washington can attempt to convince the world that it was in the process of leaving the region, and this was a decision made by Israel and Israel alone.